grade. Today we're going to be doing Module 4, Lesson 6, and for this lesson we are going to be multiplying fractions, but it's going to look a little bit different from our previous lesson. So for example, and you'll see this on your notes as well for Lesson 6, we are going to be looking at problems that say something like 1/3 of 6, and then there's all these little circles. You might be kind of confused what we're doing with these. Well, remember, whenever I see 1/3 of 6, this of part is just another way of me saying 1/3 times 6. So we know that from before, when we were solving these problems, we could think of this problem as 1/3 times 6 over 1. Oops, sorry. So we're going to be looking at this problem as if it was 1/3 times 6. But remember, we like to put this 1 here just so we have that placeholder, and all whole numbers technically have this invisible number 1 underneath them. So when I get to this part, I'm going to do 1 times 6, which is 6, and 3 times 1, which is 3. And then that gives me 6/3. Now remember, we can look at this fraction 6/3 as a division problem. I can think of this now as 6 divided by 3, or maybe I could rewrite that as 6 divided by 3. And I know that 6 divided by 3 equals 2. But let's say this division part was difficult for you, and that's okay. What we're going to do is we're going to use these models to help us out with this. So this is just a different way for you to do these problems if you want to try them in a different way. If not, you can still use the multiplication way that we have learned, and that can help you out as well. So we're going to take a look at this problem right here, 1/3 of 6. What I have are 6 total like dots or placeholders, and I want to find out what is 1/3 of that. Since my denominator is 3, that means I want to break my model up into 3 equal parts. So to do that, I'm just going to simply draw lines going straight down, and what I now have is 1, 2, 3 groups. And there are 3 equal groups, and they all make up 6. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about, well, what is 1/3 of 6? So what I want to do is I just want to look at one group. So remember what we talked about? There's 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups. So we can think of this as 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So in just 1/3, how many parts are there? Well, in 1/3, I have 2 parts. So that also gives me my answer of 2. So again, if you get to this 6 divided by 3 part and you have some difficulty, or you have some difficulty with this fraction right here, you can use these models to then help you figure out what your answer is supposed to be. So again, we started with 6 dots because that's how much we're trying to find on the part of. So we start with 6 dots. We broke it into thirds because my denominator is 3. And then to get my answer, I just look at how much is in that 1/3. In the book, you're not going to see your groups labeled, but if it helps you to label your groups like 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, you can do that to help yourself out. So we're going to look at the next problem. And our next problem is going to be very similar to this one. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at part B, and part B is now 2/3 of 6. So I'm still going to have these 6 dots here. And what I'm first going to do is I'm going to think about this as just a multiplication problem. So I can think of this as 2/3 times 6. I remember this 6 has an invisible number 1 underneath it. Since it's a floating number, it's like a whole number. So then we're going to do 2 times 6, which gives me 12, and 3 times 1, which gives me 3. Now, my fraction is 12/3, but I want to think of this as a division problem instead of just a fraction. So I have 12 divided by 3. So if I were to write out that division expression, I would have 12 divided by 3, and that gives me 4, because 3 times 4, or 3 groups of 4, can fit into 12 evenly. But again, if this part is difficult for you, that is why we have this part over here to help us out then. So what we're going to do is, again, I have my 6 total dots. Again, my denominator is 3, so I'm going to split this 6 into 3 equal parts. So we have 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. When I take a look at this 2 up here, that tells me that I want to find what is 2/3 of 6. So I'm still going to shade in my 1/3, but then I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to shade in my 2/3 as well. So I shaded in all of 1/3, all of 2/3. I'm not shading in 3/3 because I just want to know what 2/3 is. And then I count up how many spaces I have counted up. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and that lets me know that 2/3 of 6 just equals 4. And then after that, another way that you can think of these problems, and this might be a little bit complicated, so this is just if you want to think of your problems like this. You do not have to do this. When Mrs. O'Mara looks at these problems, what I will do is I'll look at my whole number, and I'll divide it by the denominator. So I'll think, what is 6 divided by 3? Well, I know that 6 divided by 3 equals 2. And normally, if I'm just finding 1/3, that would be my answer. But what I see up here is I have this numerator, which is 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 6 divided by 3, which equals 2, and then I'm going to take that 2, and I'm going to multiply it by this number that is in my numerator. So 2 times 2 equals 4. And that's another way that you can solve your problems. And this might even be a little bit quicker for you as well. So I took the whole number, divided it by the denominator, and then multiplied that answer by the numerator to get my final answer of 4. So as you can see, all these different ways gave me the same answer. It's just whichever method works best for you. So we're going to go ahead and erase this problem and take a look at another one. So this next problem, we're adding a little bit more onto it. So we have 1/4 of 12. So again, just like last time, we have the option to just rewrite this as a multiplication problem and solve from there. So we have 1/4 times 12, remember whole numbers, they'll always stay up in the numerator, and then just imagine that little number 1 underneath it. So we have 1/4 times 12 over 1. That can be 1 times 12, which is 12, and 4 times 1, which is 4. I have an improper fraction, 12 over 4, or I could think of this as a division problem, 12 divided by 4. So I'm going to think of that as a division problem, 12 divided by 4. 12 divided by 4 gives me 3, and 3 would be my final answer. Now, again, if this part confuses you, or if you write it as a standard algorithm and you have difficulty figuring out what this number is up here, that's when you could also then try the model. So we have 12 total dots right now. So we have 4 by 3, which gives me 12 total dots. And I just want to figure out what 1/4 of that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split this into 4 equal groups. So for this one, I can just draw going straight down. So we just draw going straight down. And then just because that helps me, I'm going to label my groups. So this is 1/4, this is 2/4, this is 3/4, and this is 4/4. So then what I need to do is I look at my numerator and I figure, well, how many fourths am I trying to figure out? I just want to figure out what 1/4 is going to equal. So I just shade in everything that's in my 1/4 column. And when I shade in everything that's in my 1/4 column, I see that I have 1, 2, 3 spaces filled in. So 1/4 of 12 equals 3. So that's kind of like option number 2. So you can do it the regular multiplication way we've learned. You can use these pictures and split up your pictures and find your answer from that. And then your last option is using the Mrs. O'Mara method, we'll call it. And for that one, we'll think of this as, we'll still think of it as 1/4 of 12. Remember, I like to start with the whole number, and I divide it by the denominator. So 12 divided by 4, which equals 3. And then we take this answer, we multiply it by the numerator, and 3 times 1 equals 3. And that would be my final answer for this one. Normally when you're doing this with a 1 in the numerator, it's probably easier for you to just multiply, but if I were to have, let's say, a 3 up here, that's where this method might be a little bit, might be useful for me to try out. So let's say I do my method 12 divided by 4, because those numbers still haven't changed. I know that 12 divided by 4 equals 3. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that answer and I'm going to multiply it by the numerator, which is 3 in this case. And 3 times 3 will give me 9. And that would then tell me that 3/4 of 12 equals 9. So you've just learned 3 methods of solving these types of problems. Again, you have the regular multiplication way, you have the model, and you have the Mrs. O'Mara way. So we're going to look at our word problem now, and for this word problem it says that Mrs. Pham has 8 apples. And with these 8 apples, she wants to give 3/4 of the apples to her students. How many apples will her students get? So her students are getting 3/4 of 8. It's important that we know how to write these problems in the correct order. So we're thinking about, well, what am I dividing? I'm dividing up the apples. So that's going to be my of 8 parts. So that's going to be my last number. And then I'm trying to figure out, well, how is it getting divided up? Well, it's getting divided. We want to figure out what 3/4 of this number is. So that's why we usually put the fraction first. So we have 3/4 of 8. And I'm going to use all 3 methods again. So I'm going to start with, I'll even label it this time. I'm going to start with method number 1, which is just the basic multiplication way. So we have the basic multiplication, and for this we're just going to take 3/4 times 8 over 1. And then when I multiply this, I have 3 times 8, which gives me 24 over 4 times 1, which gives me 4. So I have 24/4. So I have 24 divided by 4, and that gives me 6. If you know your facts really, really well, this is probably going to be the easiest method for you because you just know your facts really, really well. But if you don't know your facts really well, then you could use the model. So for our model, we have to set up a model that is going to show me 24 dots. No, 32 dots. 32 dots, sorry. So we want a model that shows me 32 dots. No, 24 dots? Oh. Sorry, 5th grade. You're actually going to be drawing a model of 8 dots because whatever the of number is, that's how many dots you're going to draw. So if you have of 8, you draw 8 dots. If you have of 16, you would draw 16 dots. So I'm going to draw it out kind of like an array. Something that you may have learned in 3rd grade is those arrays. So I have a 4x2 array to show me what 8 looks like. And then I need to split them evenly up into groups of 4. So I'm just going to kind of split down this way. I'm going to label my groups just because that helps me out. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4. Then I need to shade in 3/4. So I'm going to shade in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I shaded in all of 1/4, I shaded in all of 2/4, and I shaded in all of 3/4, and that gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So again, I get 6 as my answer. Now the last way that you can solve these problems is using the Mrs. O'Mara way, and with this, we're going to still just look at it as 3/4 of 8. I'm going to first do where I divide my whole number by my denominator. So I do 8 divided by 4. That gives me 2. So 8 divided by 4, which equals 2. And then I take this answer and I multiply it by the numerator. So 2 times 3. And that gives me 6. So if you're really good with your facts, this is the best way for you to do that. If you're really good with maybe visual stuff and models, or you have a little bit of difficulty with this division part, this would probably be a good way for you to do your problems. And if you want to do more of this just maybe in your heads, you can do the Mrs. O way if you want to try a more mental math approach for this problem. But either way, fifth grade, these are the 3 different ways you can solve your problems. You do not have to do all 3 ways, especially when you get to your You Try problem or the problem set. You guys can choose between any of these methods to help you solve the problems. On the back, you're going to be doing a word problem, and this word problem says, in a class of 24 students, 6 are boys. How many boys are in class? So you're going to be trying to find what is 5/6 of 24 to figure out how many boys are in class. Again, you can do any of these methods. You just have to do one of them. If you want to try all 3, you can, but you just have to do one. So good luck, fifth grade, and please let me know if you need any help.